This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And we are in week 2 of a new series called No Offense, and it's about how to live unoffended. And something that you said was that if we want to be free from offense, if we want to be free from being offended, then we need to change the way we see. Yeah. Because as you told us, it really comes down to a sight problem. Mm-hmm. The first week we learned that we need to see ourselves differently, that we need to see ourselves the way that God sees us. And then this week we focused on seeing others the way that God sees us. And it kind of came down to this whole point of you can't be like the Father unless you can see like the Father. Yeah. So share with us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what I started with was this whole idea that if we could see people the way that God sees them, then I think that it would make a difference. I don't know that it would solve every problem, but I think it would make a difference. Because, like, if you could hear why someone was the way that they were, at the very least, maybe you could have an appreciation for it. Like, maybe people think a certain way, vote a certain way, feel a certain way about a social issue because of environments that they lived in, that they were raised in, that they spent lots of time in. And what you have to realize about these environments that we all came from, these were filled with the people that we trusted the most in the world. Mm-hmm. So when the people that we trust the most in the world and that we have the most respect for all believe something, that becomes a really powerful influence on the way we see and believe. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps these people that you are so offended by the way they see the world, I'm not saying that like their point is valid or that they're right. I'm just saying, would you appreciate them more or be able to humanize them a little bit if you could see all the stuff that's true about them, all the stuff that they've had to walk through. Like if you so this is something probably near to your heart as a lady in ministry. If you've ever experienced a lady in any level of leadership that maybe is a little sharp when she deals with people. Now, to some, what they would say is like, oh, she's, all this negative stuff. Mm-hmm. What they don't see is the amount of times that person has been disrespected on their path towards where they're at. Mm-hmm. And like they don't see all the times that people said, oh, I'm sorry, I don't believe in you, or I disagree, I think that you're wrong. They don't see all that path. And so what you are experiencing is maybe they're a little like sharp with you or a little bit like whatever. Mm-hmm. But what you don't see is their whole journey up to that point. Mm-hmm. It'd be the same thing with someone that like, is as a guy, maybe they're just really, really rough around the edges. Mm-hmm. But you didn't see like that his father was like that and his grandfather was like that. Mm-hmm. And they told him that being rough around the edges and being, harsh and hard, that's what it meant to be a man.
Right.
And that came from the people in his life that they respected so much. Yeah. So like whatever it is that you're experiencing about someone that maybe you don't care too much for, there is something behind that that is the root reason why they are the way they are. And it again, if someone's sharp with you and nasty towards you, it doesn't mean it's okay. Right. If someone has a worldview that is incredibly harmful to people, it's not saying, oh, well, that's okay. They were just raised that way. All I'm saying is, would you be able to at least understand that person better if you could see them the way God sees them? Because the truth is, everything that's wrong with us, and this is all of us, God knows all of it.
Yeah.
God did not fall in love with a future version of us. God fell in love with the version of us like the book of Romans says. He died for us while we were still sinners.
Yes.
He didn't wait for you to get it all together. He didn't wait for you to have your opinions changed on all the ways that you were wrong. He died for you while you were still a sinner.
Yeah.
He was crazy about you long before you ever even existed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the way God feels about us, there has to be, and we're made in his image,
Yeah.
then it's not impossible for us to do that for other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not impossible. And I know there are people that think that this whole thing of living unoffended looks weak, it looks impossible, there's no way that we should be doing this or whatnot. And I'm telling you, if we're made in the image of a God that does it, then this is what he's calling us to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved how you pointed out that when God looks at someone, they can be completely wrong, but also completely loved at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think it's that level of being able to like remove yourself enough, like in your own personal, because that's where I think most of the time we take it very personal. Like it may not even be anything specifically towards us, but we take it so personal. And if God, who created that person, doesn't take it personally, and is able to do this, like we should be able to also, because even if it might be an offense, I mean, I am someone who's gone through abuse and trauma and things, and I've been able to do this only because of God's help.
Yeah.
I have been able to do this where I have been able to say and know that what they did was completely wrong, but also be able to show them love in a way that I couldn't have on my own.
It's hard. It's hard
to have that forgiveness. Like it is incredibly hard. But one thing that I like pointed out when we were discussing with our group is that oftentimes we're offended by someone and they don't even realize, like they may not even realize it, or like they don't even care. Yeah. And oftentimes the way that we've chosen to react to that or deal with that, it causes ourselves more harm than anybody else, because we're not able to just simply let it go and love anyway.
Most offensive people don't care that they're offensive. Mm-hmm. So like the fact that you're offended by them, that they don't care.
Yeah.
They do not care at all. So the only person that you're hurting is you. Mm-hmm. Offense works just like unforgiveness and grudges and everything else. Mm-hmm. You're the only person that gets hurt by it. Yeah. Because if they didn't care to hurt you in the first place, then they definitely don't care about the fact that you're hurt. Yeah. So it's, that old like kind of cheesy statement, like holding a grudge is like swallowing poison and expecting it to kill the other person. No, the only person that it's going to hurt is you. Yeah. And so you got to get past that. And that point Sunday that God, when he looks at people, they can be completely wrong and completely loved. When you were just talking about that, I was sitting here thinking about this past weekend. My son, because we wonder how God can do this. This past weekend, my son and me had a pretty rough weekend, like on Saturday, and really all last week. Like it was pretty rough. Just he wasn't, doing the stuff that we wished as parents that he would be doing, and such, and I probably wasn't responding well or whatnot. But in the midst of him being completely wrong and doing stuff that was completely wrong, it didn't matter that the whole time through all of that, I still Sunday I was really busy with church, and then I had a meeting, and then I was doing this filming for this thing I'm a part of. So and all I could think about all day long was getting home to my son, even though he had driven me absolutely crazy all week long, and there was a good chance he was going to do it again when I got home. All I could think about was getting back to my son, because I love him so much. That's how God does this. Yeah. Is because he is a father first and foremost, then he is able to you can be completely wrong, and yet he's still constantly thinking about you. Yeah. He's still so badly just wants to come home and play Uno with you, and that's who he is, and we have to get to that point. It's easy for me to do that with my child, but now I've got to learn how to see people that aren't my children like God sees them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you talked a little bit about how when we are easily offended, and we look at these different ways that people act and all of this, we have this tendency to kind of have what you pointed out as a higher standard than God. Yep. when we look at these things. And so let's flesh that out a little bit, because that's one of those like, oh man, maybe I do feel like I have a higher standard than God. Like, how
Yeah.
can we look at that and start to make the shift to understand that we really should not have that view?
Yeah, and no one is arrogant enough to say this
Right.
out loud.
Oh no.
But in their actions they do it
Mhm.
completely. Because again, if God cannot be offended by people who are so offensive and can love them despite it, but you can't,
Mhm.
then you all of a sudden have a higher standard than God.
Mhm.
And what in the history of the world would make us have a higher standard than God? Knowing all that we've done,
Mhm.
knowing all, like the beginning of the sermon, we talked about how everyone's walking around with baggage
Mhm.
and stuff, and everyone is walking around with baggage, but
Mhm.
we're also responsible for a lot of baggage on other people.
Mhm.
I have said horrible things to
Yeah.
people. I have done horrible things to people.
Mhm.
And so if that's true about me, and yet somehow God's not offended by me,
Mhm.
He hasn't stopped loving me, He hasn't stopped giving me chances. If I can't extend that same thing to someone else, then I have a higher standard than God.
Mhm.
And sometimes we just need to say ridiculous things like that out loud, so the way we can realize how ridiculous
Yeah.
it is. Like,
Yeah.
you think that you care about that social issue more than God cares about it?
Right.
I promise you, you fill in the blank with whatever it is that you care about, it breaks the heart of God so much more than it will ever
Mhm.
break your heart. And yet, the proponents of that, He is still not offended by them.
Mhm.
He is still not like, there's not a lack of love for them. There's not like a, you better get it to get, like, there's none of that
Mhm.
towards them. So why do we have that standard?
Yeah.
It's an arrogance issue,
Mhm.
because we will act that out. But I mean, none of us would say that. None of us
Right.
go around going, "Ha, I got a higher standard
Yeah.
than God." Of course not. But that's
Yeah.
practically how a lot of us live.
Yeah. I think I say all the time, like, I'm so glad God's God and I'm not,
I'm a horrible
because of
God.
this issue. Because I would probably treat people very different or do things very different in a lot of situations, because of the way that I view things or that I think about things or people.
Yeah,
And
definitely would.
I am glad that I'm not God, because I know that if I was even looking at myself and the things that I have done, I would have not reacted to me in the way that God reacted to me. There's no way I'd be sitting here with you right now. Like, that's for sure. And so I think it is something that, like, when you actually get to that point and kind of really admit that, then it helps to kind of shift your thinking just a little bit. Something that you pointed out within the story of the prodigal son that I thought was just beautiful, that a lot of people probably don't point out, is the fact that the love and compassion that the father had and showed the son happened before the son actually apologized.
Yep. And again, this comes back to, do you have a higher standard than God?
Mhm.
Because God offered you forgiveness.
Mhm.
He had already made a way long before you were ever you.
Yeah.
And so, again, do you have a higher standard than God? God offers the way to be reconciled
Mhm.
long before you ever repent. The way's already been paved.
Mhm.
So it's the same thing. If I don't have a higher standard than God, then I have to operate the same way. I can't operate off of, well, I won't be offended once they finally say sorry.
Mhm.
It's like, no, you can choose not to be offended now, and then that's on them. If they want to not say sorry, they've got to deal with those
Mhm.
consequences. All it's going to do to you is leave you in a prison where you can't shake
Yeah.
free of it.
Yeah.
Where it's the first thing you think about in the morning, every time their name pops up on Facebook,
Mhm.
every time you see them and you end up in the same place by them, whatever it is, you're the one that will be affected by it,
Yeah.
and you'll just never be free.
Yeah. And I think some people will hear that and think, well, you don't know what I've been through, you don't know whatever. But this is the very thing that, like, I've had to exercise in my own life, because I mean, I have people who abuse me who I can't even tell you their last name. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was so long ago. I've never been around them. And if I chose not to extend that forgiveness, it would have continued to keep me in a place where I wouldn't have been able to fully heal. Like, and I think there is that level of forgiveness that we have to understand, that just because you forgive someone doesn't mean that you have to grant them access to your life again, or doesn't mean that you have to trust them in the same way.
Exactly.
I think that is an important distinction to remember, that just because you forgive, it doesn't mean, hey, we're going to be best buds again. Like,
Forgiveness is not the same thing as
yes.
trust. That's the problem that most people have.
Yeah.
When pastors talk about how we're supposed to forgive, this is always the pushback that they get, is like, yeah, but like what they did, like I can't expose my family to that ever again. And I go, well, that's two different situations. Forgiveness is different than trust. Forgiveness is different than wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay? I can forgive someone who has done me wrong without inviting them over for dinner.
Right.
Or giving them access to hurt me again. That's
Right.
not the same thing, because let's say that it is someone that has hurt you and has the chance of hurting you and your family in the future. You're not acting loving to your family if you grant them access back. But you also don't have to have ill will towards that person.
Yeah.
You don't have to have malice towards them. When you think about them, you can think of them prospering and them in such. And so you can have a good, positive outlook for them without ever granting them access back to your life, because these are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Forgiveness simply frees you from the burden of having to feel a certain way about what someone else did. That frees you. It has nothing to do with the other person.
Yeah.
The other person, if they want to continue to be a scumbag or whatever, that's on them. They'll have consequences for that.
Yeah.
But if you live like this, you are the one that ends up in the prison.
Absolutely.
Not them. They don't care. They're the ones that did it in the first place.
Absolutely. Like, there are many times and many people that will hurt you that you will never hear from again. And the fact that you hold that bitterness, like, it just creates so much pain that you don't get out of when you decide to sit in that for so long. Like, I think about my stepmom, and I remember the pastor who actually hired me here, whenever we were talking through things, he said, do you hold any bitterness towards her? And I said, you know what? No, actually I don't, because I realized at a certain point, like, she's just a lost individual.
Yep.
Like, and it goes back to something you said last week of, you can't expect those who are sinners, like those who don't believe in Christ, you can't expect them to act like him, because they're not, they are unbelievers. Like, they are sinners. You can't expect them to stop what they're doing. And that's what I had to realize with her in that situation, because it took me a long time to get there. And so I appreciated what you said too, is that it doesn't happen as like, there's a process. It's not, you don't need to rush it necessarily, but like,
sometimes this teaching on forgiveness and things, people think like, oh, well, I'm supposed to do this overnight.
Yeah.
No. This is a lifelong pursuit of learning how to do this. But it's being committed to the pursuit of it that sets you free.
Yeah.
Whereas if your mind is just made up, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to be offended. I'm going to continue to hold a grudge. Then you'll never shake free. So, but you're not going to just pray about this one time and I mean, can God do that? Yes, He absolutely can. I'm sure that He's done it for certain people, but a lot of times it takes a while.
Yeah, it does. And I think like those deeply seated baggages that like luggage that we're carrying of trauma and abuse and things like that, like those take a long time, and often counseling and those things to really heal through. But forgiveness is a huge part of that. Yeah. However, I also want to say that the whole idea of the goodness, let me go back in your notes. The way that the Father was able to treat the Son was all from how He was able to see the Son. Often we just really do have to begin to pray for that individual. Like, say it's someone that you work with that you're really struggling with, and you're having a really hard time seeing them in the way that God sees them. Something you can do that I'm telling you will change your heart almost like probably 100% of the time is to begin to pray for that person. I have exercised this in my own life many, many times where when I begin praying for that individual, there's this shift that begins to happen where I begin to see them a little bit differently, and a shift that begins to happen where they start responding a different way. And I believe that's the Holy Spirit and God at work within that, because it takes a certain level of that love and compassion to begin praying for somebody that you might see as an enemy. And when you begin to do that and that shift starts to take place, it can open up some doors for some things like that to begin to happen. I don't know if you've ever done that or had that happen before in your life or your walk, but I think prayer is a very, very big portion of this. I think, like our group last night, we kept coming back to this whole, you have to continually pray for this. It's not something that comes naturally or easy to us because we aren't God.
No, this is not easy, and it's totally countercultural. So everything, like somebody was telling me after in between services yesterday about their story, where they forgave their abuser. Their abuser found Christ, and so they were like, I mean, that's amazing. Even though you hurt me, I believe you found Christ, then that means that your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
And she was telling me, she said, and my family tells me how wrong I am for extending that forgiveness to this person. I was like, yeah, of course they do, because the world it looks at us when we talk about forgiving people that have wronged us and not holding grudges, and they're like, that makes you weak. That makes you a chump. That makes you somebody that you're just going to let the world trample all over you. And it's like, I know that's the way that it looks, but that's the way that it looked when Jesus hung naked on a cross. It looked like he lost, but we didn't realize that he was sneaking victory in through what looked like an L. Like, and so, yes, perhaps I do look like maybe I do look weak to you.
Yeah.
Maybe it does look like maybe someone else will try to take advantage of me, if I'm not real stern and stuff with people. Yeah. But, like, this is the model of Jesus. And so, what normally looks like weakness, there's actually an incredible strength to living unoffended. And our culture flips that and goes, no, you guys look weak for this. I'll tell you, people that cannot hold a grudge, people that can, like, forgive people that have done horrible things to them. Like, I was telling my Wednesday night group a couple weeks ago, I said, you remember that church shooting down in Charleston, South Carolina? That boy went in and shot and killed like 9 people or something. And when he was being, like, during his trial and such, like, family members and parishioners from that church, like, stood up and said, hey, listen, we love you.
Yeah.
We forgive you for what you did. And, like, you got to be going like, are you serious?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, when you're really captured by the love of Christ, this is possible for you to live that way.
Yeah.
Because you're going to leave vengeance and justice up to God, because that belongs to him anyways.
Absolutely.
And he's never called you to be his bodyguard or his bouncer or his bounty hunter. He simply has called you to love people, even your enemies.
Yeah.
And that's what you'll be able to do that if you could go throughout the day and look at everyone the way that God looks at them.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have another great week next week where we're going to be talking a little bit about anger. So we hope that you'll tune in for that. As always, if you haven't liked or subscribed to this channel, be sure to do so you don't miss out on any extra new content that we put out for the Extra Point or for our sermons that we do dive deeper in through this podcast. But we enjoy your time as always, and we look forward to giving you more practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.